Everyone, welcome back. It's been a while since I've posted any videos. That's for multiple reasons. The main one being that I have been busy beyond my wildest dreams. Um, Between work and personal life and everything else, I've been running around like crazy the past month or so. I was at one point I was quarantined, so I was not allowed to leave my house. I'll put up a video about what that was like in the coming weeks. Um, it was an interesting experience for sure. I've been back and forth between in person and distance learning as school has closed itself down and then reopened, and then back and forth, multiple times now as the holidays have gotten closer and there have been, spreading events and all those sorts of things. Luckily, it looks like transmission isn't happening within my building. It's pretty much people that haven't been practicing what they need to outside of the building, and then they bring it in. So we've been in pretty good shape. I have to give props to my district. They've been doing an excellent job. Um, but yeah, so life got in the way. I've been busy. Um, so what I'm sharing with you today, this is a much longer video than I would normally present for this channel. But this is a edited version. I chopped a little bit here and there from basically off the front and the back of this video. Just things that were identifying information about myself beyond the normal amount that you'd be able to identify. But I like to keep my private life separate from my public life. So I removed identifying information, which also happened to remove some of the little bits as an intro and outro that I had in this presentation. So I presented at the uh, Tech Education Fall Conference for State University of New York. And so this is that presentation. There's a couple little hiccups in it. This is my first time that I was really recording something for colleagues versus being here on the channel. So I got a lot more technical than I normally do. But this covers multiple things that are especially useful for people in my position, which is those of us that have between 5 and 10 years of teaching experience. Because we're not green and we're not rookies anymore, but we're also not extremely seasoned, highly polished veterans either. We're in that transitional stage. So that's what this video is really aimed at, is for those people, but it's also very good for new people. I talk about a couple different things, a couple theories that I've developed. This is also where I'm finally, after many times of mentioning it, discussing the two different types of teacher and my theory on that. So hopefully you'll all find it of some value. I enjoyed making it and I enjoyed talking about these things. So that's what we've got for you. Please ignore, there are a couple little spots where I have a little bit of a brain fart. There's one part that I say the phrase methodical methods, and I've never felt more embarrassed in my life than to post something like that without catching it to a professional conference or organization. But from what I saw from other people's videos, there was similar stuff going on. It happens. All of us are fried, especially at this point in the year, getting into December. This actually is December 2nd, is right now when I'm recording this. This video is almost a month old at this point. So that's what we've got. I hope you enjoy it, and I'm not going to drag this out any longer because I want you to be able to see the actual content. So thank you again for stopping in. So first off, I need to talk about what do I actually mean by finding your groove, right? A research study was published in 1999 by two gentlemen, and it's now commonly referred to in the psychology community as the Dunning-Kruger effect. Okay, these two guys did some research on how we self-assess our own skill and experience and how confident we are in it based on how much experience we have. And that's where this little chart comes into play. Okay, and I've put my own little annotations in here that I've picked up as I've gone along, and I actually use this with my students to try and show them what it's like to learn. So the Dunning-Kruger effect is really just a study of how high your confidence is based on the amount of experience you have. Okay, there are variations, and no one's going to go through this exact sort of process, but it's a good generalized way of describing our process of gaining confidence and experience. So when we start out, all of us really start out with no experience and no confidence because we have no knowledge, right? As we gain knowledge, we gain our confidence and we gain some experience, right? So the first section of this line would really show where we are as we are in our college career and where you are in your first few years as a teacher, right? I use this all the time with my students, and one of my kind of catchphrases in my class is "Don't climb Mount Stupid." Right? That's what I refer to as the peak of confidence with a lack of experience. Okay, so kind of the way I look at teaching and the way I think all teachers work, whether we realize it or not, our job is to teach our students to avoid the summit of Mount Stupid, as I like to call it. Right? We try and find a way around the mountain without having to climb over the whole thing. Right? That way, that's what keeps them safer. And it also means that when they finally get to what I call the tumble, they don't tumble as far. So what happens is that tumble is really everyone sort of reaches a point where they're at the peak of their confidence, but they don't have as much experience and expertise as they think they do. And you'll have that turning point where you realize that that's the case. Okay? And that's where you start to hit the tumble and you start to head on down to the valley of despair, as I like to call it. Okay, this is that point where you've realized, maybe there was some specific event or a series of events that changed your perspective on your own performance and your own amount of expertise, and that puts a big dent in your confidence when it first happens, right? So the goal of gaining experience is to get that confidence back. So, in my case, I found myself in that valley of despair about 2 years ago, I'd say, was probably the worst part of it, right? Everyone has an experience, and the goal is to get yourself out of that valley, right? Get your confidence back. So that comes with a lot of hard work and a lot of study. And really the way that I look at it is this is that turning point where people either stay in the profession as a teacher or they leave, right? That's around your 3 to 4, maybe 5 year mark, depending on where you are as a teacher and how you view yourself, personal confidence levels, all those sorts of things, right? What your personality is. So for some people, this tumble into the valley of despair may be that they're struggling with evaluations. It may be that they might have made a mistake, made a kid cry or something, and they realized that they don't know as much as they thought they do. Maybe they learned something about a student that they didn't realize, those sorts of things. Or maybe in your case, you just find that you just totally bomb a lesson, right? You just have a lesson that's an absolute disaster. Maybe you have a few lessons that are absolute disasters, right? If it's a really bad one, maybe you're getting put on tips or something like that. That's your valley of despair, okay? And it's your turning point. And what makes a successful teacher is how you handle that moment, right? Do you learn from it and pick yourself back up and move forward? Or do you just kind of dwell there in the valley? So, when I talk about myself, I think right now I'm somewhere in that slope of enlightenment, right? You have that moment where you now realize, okay, this is what I've been doing wrong and this is how I can improve it. You have, an aha moment or a light bulb moment. And most of us are somewhere in that slope of enlightenment, right? That's basically the position between being a green rookie teacher and being a seasoned veteran. So I would call that slope of enlightenment your 5 to 10 year mark. Okay, as one of my colleagues used to say, they didn't feel like they were really a strong, confident teacher until they were in about their 6th to 8th year. So it's different for everyone, like I said. And eventually, as you grow over time, you'll hit that plateau of sustainability, right? You're an expert in your field. You've got a reasonable amount of confidence without being overzealous. And you just slowly continue to gain knowledge and experience over time, right? Maybe at a slower rate because there's kind of a ceiling there. But over time, you gain more and more. And if you're one of the select few, you might take that even to another level where you start to hit another slope of enlightenment, which is where you may be making revolutionary changes to the entire community, to the way things are done, anything like that. Right? And that's where we should really all aim for, but that's going to be down the road. Nothing happens instantaneously. So finding your groove really means you're trying to approach that plateau of sustainability, right? You're trying to season yourself well. So in order to get there, I've come up with some of my own theories, okay? People hear all the time about type A and type B teachers. Okay? And that's where this little scatter chart comes into play for me. I don't use the term type A and B in the same way that most people do. Okay, and I think there's a lot of bias towards type A and type B as one being good and one being bad, and I don't think that's the case. Okay, the way I look at it, type A people are what I consider teachers who view teaching as a science, right? Whereas type B people, which is the category I think I fit into, is people who view teaching more as an art. Okay, and everyone fits somewhere on this spectrum. Okay, and that directly correlates to whether you are a teacher who works with your students in more of a collaborative sense, where you treat them more as equal contributors to your classroom, versus an authoritarian sense, which is where it's more of a top-down approach to learning. Right? That's also kind of how you work your discipline. So depending where you are on this chart, okay, you may view, all of us fit somewhere. There are no absolutes, but there are some danger zones and some places that we just can't get to. Right? You'll see dead center there. The unicorn zone, as I like to call it. That's because these things do not exist. There's no such thing as a perfect teacher. Okay? Get that idea out of your mind if you have it. Okay? There's no such thing. Okay? If you're like me and you view teaching as more of an art, you'll be somewhere to the right side of this spectrum. Okay, and depending on how you handle your classroom, whether you're collaborative or authoritarian, as I've been calling it, is whether you're what I like to call a B plus or a B minus type of teacher. Okay, and of course, as you get to the extreme ends of these spectrums, right, if you get to the extreme end of a B plus, that's where you have absolute chaos, as I like to call it. Right, you are more of an instinctual type of teacher who doesn't particularly organize things as much, right? You're not as scientifically methodical, and the students have a lot more power over the room. And when you get to a certain point, there's a fine line that you cross where your classroom devolves into just chaos. The kids are running everything, and you can't keep up. Okay, on the other side of that is what I call the B minus teacher, okay, which is the teacher who is pretty much, they think that they're organized, but they're not. And they take it out on the kids when the kids don't understand it, right? That's that fine line, which I call angry frustration. So we're trying to avoid getting to those extremes, right? We're trying to fit as close to, our end goal is to get to that unicorn zone, even though we can't get dead center of it. Okay. On the other side of the spectrum, the scientific teacher, the ones who view teaching as a science, are, it's the ones that are really more prominent in our profession, right? These are the people who do everything is completely organized, meticulous, and these people, there are positives and negatives to each side of this spectrum, which I'll talk about in a moment. These people tend to be the types that you see more often. These are the ones who, love making, whiteboards and charts and graphs and all these sorts of things, diagrams. And they do a lot more summative assessment than formative assessment, whereas the people towards the B side of the spectrum focus a lot more on formative versus summative. Okay, so those type A plus people, the ones that are scientific and collaborative, okay, if they get too far on that spectrum, those are the teachers that you tend to see who just shut down. right? When they get to their valley of despair, they just shut down. They don't know what to do. They don't know where to go, and they just get really depressed and down. Okay, on the other side of that spectrum, you have your A negative teachers, which are, the ones that I find, you see them more often than the A plus teachers. They tend to be the ones who are extremely methodical and extremely strict, right? And that's what I like to call the dystopian side of things when you get too far out on that corner of the spectrum, which would be your teachers who, on paper, are probably the best, but at the same time, they don't have the respect of their students. They don't have the respect of maybe even their coworkers if they're really bad in that sense. These are people who are really, out for it. It's that 1984 mentality. Big Brother's watching you. Do it my way, or you're going to be in trouble. These are the people who write referrals incessantly, right? As many of us know who've been teaching for a few years, if you get classroom management right, you won't write a referral for years on end. And chances are, when you do have to write a referral, it's only because it's a student that's not in your classroom. Maybe you came across something in the hallway, right? So that's kind of our spectrum here, right? We've got the B end of the spectrum, which is teachers that view teaching as an art, right? These are those people who go based off of instinct and their gut feeling, versus the type A teachers, which are very scientific and view things more methodically, right? And most of the resources out there are really geared towards type A teachers because they are much more prominent in the community. So this is where we get to talking about type B, who I believe are very overlooked when it comes to finding resources for themselves. These are people who, when you try and put an instinctual teacher into, let's say an APPR evaluation, these people, if they haven't honed their craft, particularly in the beginning of their career, they may have trouble with evaluations because they're not particularly good at following the methodical approach that most APPR evaluations focus on. Right? They're not good at ticking the boxes, as I like to call it. Right? The dog and pony show, that sort of deal. They're not as good at that. Okay. These people tend to do things on the fly. They don't do as in-depth of planning because if they hold a belief like me, they know that whatever plans you have go out the window the second you start teaching. So they have a lot of positive qualities in that sense. I find that the instinctual approach lets you make adjustments to your lessons on the fly. Okay, these people are highly adaptable because it's what they do all day due to the lack of methodical planning in most cases. Right? They excel in small groups and one-on-one instruction, which is a huge deal. Okay, as many of you know, large group instruction is probably the most difficult to get right. Especially for those of you who are college students, when you leave your department and you go to any department where your professors or anything like that aren't trained in education, right? They don't have education degrees necessarily. It's very easy to do a large group instruction session wrong, right? It turns into a lecture, which is what you try and avoid as a teacher. So our type B people tend to struggle more with that because of the fact that they're less organized for presentations. Okay, so those people, our type Bs, tend to excel in small group stuff, 5 students or less, and they really shine when it comes to one-on-one instruction. Okay, and that's because of that on-the-fly mentality. When a student asks you a question or a piece of advice or an opinion, a type B teacher can give them perfect answers right on the fly and even teach them some new things, right? It's like a perpetual teaching moment. Every student gets their own unique education in that sense, right? Which is really one of the things that we aim for as educators. Okay, like I said, type Bs tend to focus more on formative assessment, and that's because type Bs tend to look at things as less of an absolute. Okay, it's not just you're either on this part of your spectrum or this part of your spectrum. they see the gray areas and they adjust for it. Okay. And the big problem with being a type B teacher, especially if you're new, is there's really not allowed out there as far as pedagogical resources go, because most of those are very methodical, especially if you're talking about books and those sorts of things. They tend to teach very methodical methods where it's, to a type B teacher, it feels almost robotic, like you're trying to fit into a cookie cutter. Okay, so to that end, a lot of type B teachers may struggle to find resources to develop themselves as teachers. And that's where my approach tends to come into play. Okay, I've spent a lot of time trying to better myself as a teacher, because when I first started out, I was way high up on that peak amount stupid. Okay, I'll admit it. My first year, I thought I was the best teacher on earth. And in the end of that year, my entire world basically fell down upon itself when I realized I was nothing, right? We all, when we come out of college, we've got high hopes, lofty ideas, and, we're just idealists when we come out because we have no experience at the time. And that's where, once I started turning to, teacher pedagogy books and different methods. I looked at the APL method, which was excellent, but it didn't really quite work for me. It just helped me get some ideas. And that's because I am that type B teacher. I'm not as good at the methodical end of things. And I found resources that worked for me, right? Type B, instinctual teachers tend to be more thinkers and observers than active participants when it comes to the way that they evaluate their students, right? We don't necessarily ask as many direct questions of our students. We tend to be observers. We watch our students' behavior and use that to judge whether we believe they understand the content or not, based on how the student is performing and acting. So for type Bs, we tend to get our ideas from more unusual, or maybe they're not directly educational books or resources. Okay, we don't go out and buy teacher self-help books that show you a message. We might go out and look more towards philosophy, right? Things that are more unobtrusive, things that are we can think about subliminally to kind of create meaning of our own. So for me, that tended to be three main factors. I looked a lot at Eastern philosophy. Okay, in particular, I looked at Lao Tzu, who wrote basically the kind of like the handbook for Taoism, which is really more of a philosophy than a religion if you read into it. And the whole idea behind that fits into play with the Dunning-Kruger effect. Is really all we can know is that we know nothing, and we have to pursue that knowledge, right? Reading something like Lao Tzu's writings is something that can help develop your personal philosophy, right? There are things in there in many of his writings that you can apply to education, even though they're not directly speaking about education, right? It's the same thing with the Japanese philosophy of Kaizen, right? Any of you who've gone through Dan Tryon's manufacturing courses know about Kaizen in the context of manufacturing, but it doesn't just apply to manufacturing. Right? Believe it or not, most of the Kaizen philosophy that's used in manufacturing, you can apply to your teaching. Okay? And that's not just in planning, that's in developing your materials, your lessons. It's in developing your projects. It's the idea of constant improvement. Okay? You're always looking for ways that you can tweak. And as an instinctual teacher who can do things on the fly, between two separate class periods, you can completely change your lesson. Right? You'll still hit your key basic points that you were looking to get to, but each lesson will be more refined than the one before it. Okay, if you take that philosophy to heart. So I've thoroughly used the Kaizen method in my instruction, and it's one of the best things I ever made, one of those big light bulb moments. Okay, for those of you who spent more time in a design lab, you would have learned about Bucky Fuller. Okay, and two things that I really picked up from his writings were the idea of synergetics and tensegrity. Okay, really, as far as synergetics is concerned, you're trying to find that synergy to make everything come together into one, right? It's a matter of global thinking. You're thinking about the big picture instead of sections that you're trying to piece together. So from chaos comes order. Okay, the way I design lessons is I do most of my work in the form of modules because I like to wrap everything up with a bow. Okay, I'm not someone who does a consecutive, this is the beginning of my class. I go week to week to week to week. I have multiple modules that I can mix and match as I so choose. And that's part of that global thinking, is it all comes together to still reach your educational goals for your students. Okay, and part of developing that is to do at-work experimentation, which is what falls under Tensegrity. Okay, I'll have included some various resources at the end of this presentation so that you can read more into Synergetics and Tensegrity. But those are really key for Type B teachers, right? It's a good way to help get yourself more organized and basically help yourself become a better instructor, right? The last one, I couldn't apply as much to teaching, but it did spark some very good ideas as far as coming up with relatable projects that met my needs. Is I read multiple books written by Mr. Don Norman, who has done many things. He was a former vice president at Apple Corporation. He's a professor in, I believe it was California, and he's written multiple books. One of them is called Emotional Design, which I found was the most useful as an educator. But there's also a fantastic book called The Design of Everyday Things, which is based on user-centered design. Okay? And as a teacher, we're really designers. We design an education for our students. And if we don't consider those students the users, we won't be successful, right? Know thy student, know thyself. Okay? And that's where I come up with my kind of step-by-step, what do I have to do to get to my goal? And that's where I say, first, you have to learn from your colleagues, especially as a new teacher. Okay? You can't do things on your own and isolate yourself, or you'll never pick up tips and tricks from your coworkers and your other colleagues. Okay? Once you've done that, you start to learn from yourself as well. Right? You make mistakes. You learn from your mistakes. Then we start to learn from our students. If you are truly a teacher who engages your students, you could sit in class and have conversations with them that have nothing to do with the content and then wrap it back to relate it to the content. And the students have no idea how you do it, right? It just happens. So you learn from your students. You can take them talking about something that seems totally unrelated and relate it to the content. Okay, and lastly, you need to learn from your community. You need to know what the heck is going on around your district, right? Make some connections. Talk to local business owners and management and everything in your local community. Make some connections. You can learn about new things. You can use those to relate to your content and your instructions. You need to get out there. Okay. First thing I did when I took my position is make business cards. Okay. Now, there's some controversy over business cards this day and age. Some people think that it's, kind of self-absorbed and pompous. It makes you like you think you're more important than you actually are. But it's a great way to get in contact with people. Don't hand them out willy-nilly without even introducing yourself. But if you have a conversation with someone, for example, at a fall conference, and you want to follow up with them, it's better to have a business card on you so you can get in touch with each other. Okay? And my business card is at the end of this presentation for anyone who needs to talk more or wants to ask some more questions, or maybe even share some ideas that I might not have thought of. Hey, business cards is a huge deal. You can get 1,000 business cards for like $30, and that'll get you through for years. Okay, and that's where as we talk about that step-by-step method of figuring out yourself, learning from those around you, you start to develop your personal practice, right? In my case, I've been working on a theory, and my hope is to someday publish a book about it, what I call teams education. Okay, I hear people talking all the time about STEM and STEAM and even having arguments over it. And to be quite honest, from my point of view, they're all outdated, right? Project Lead the Way, STEM, STEAM, they have their good points, but in the end, they're buzzwords because they've been misunderstood by, education department, by professional organizations, all these sorts of things, and they don't have the meaning that they used to. And that's where I think teams education comes into play. It's what I call technology and engineering as applied math and science, which is really what we do. And, just by saying that, it's not necessarily that much different from STEAM or STEM or even Project Lead the Way philosophy, but it's definitely much less likely to be mistaken for something else. Okay, what's a makerspace? How many of you could tell me what a makerspace actually is? Outside of our discipline and people with the technology degrees, they don't really know what an actual makerspace is. To them, a makerspace is a room where you've got some computers and maybe some Legos or 3D printers, and that's a makerspace, right? Some Kinects. So the idea is to make sure that whatever terminology we use is absolutely clear. And that should go into your personal practice, right? You need to be able to articulate what you do and why you do it. So what you need to ask yourself is, do you focus on being hands-on or digital? Okay, which one do you prefer and which one do you actually do? Are you what I call a progressive teacher, which is one who combines multiple methods, or are you someone who is a flipped classroom where you record yourself for your lessons and then have your students watch it? Now, you can be a progressive teacher who does flipped classroom stuff. I do it particularly since switching to distance learning. I've recorded a lot of resources and lessons so that students can rewatch them, but I still do live instruction as the first taste of those lessons, right? I basically just record so that they can go back and rewatch it if they need a reminder on something. Okay, and that's your difference between being a progressive 21st century teacher and being a teacher who is trying to get there but hasn't quite gotten there yet. Right? For your instruction, do you prefer to preload your information, or do you prefer to teach kids on the spot as they're doing stuff? Right? That is your ability to adapt. Okay, whether you're a type A or a type B, that comes into play. Okay, what types of projects are you doing? What are your methods? Right? How do you want the kids to complete those projects? Okay, what types of projects are you doing for your content? Okay, are you like me? Do you do modules, or are you someone who prefers a prescribed consecutive set of lessons that all go in order to each other, right? Either way, though, you should be using a standards-based model to develop your plans. Okay, that's your personal practice. You need to focus on what standards you're doing. And the biggest mistake new teachers make is they try and hit all the standards. Your curriculum for your class may only touch on 2 or 3 standards. You need to look at that big global picture, right? The synergy. Your course is part of a curriculum set between multiple courses. So where does your course fit within those global technology programs? Okay, so you might only touch on 2 or 3 of the actual state standards for your course. Okay. And by doing that, you now open up the gateway for students to take other courses which touch on the other standards, right? So those standards are really there for your entire tech program as a whole, not for your single class. And that's a change in philosophy for many. Okay, so as far as 21st century classroom, like I just mentioned, right? You've now learned about yourself, you've learned about your students, your community, you've developed your own personal practice, your own pedagogy and philosophy, and your own methods. So now you got to figure out, where do you belong? Okay, if you're someone who does not like teaching digital, you probably shouldn't go into a design program or something like that. If you're someone who is not confident with tooling and machinery, You may want to focus more on the digital side of technology courses, right? If you have that opportunity. Okay, if you're someone who isn't good at being a lone wolf, doing everything by yourself, being the only person in your department, you probably shouldn't take on a position where you're the only teacher in your district or building that teaches technology. Okay, so you need to figure out where you belong. You also need to figure out how do you respond to criticism. Okay, if you go to a district where you don't like the way you're treated or something about just the feel of the district, you don't feel like you belong, right? You don't feel like you have anyone that you can relate to or ask for help or anyone you can learn from, chances are you don't belong there, right? That happened to me in the beginning of my career. I taught in one district for 3 years, and I thought it was good until I left. And once I left, I found my new district, which was like I won the lottery, right? I'm finally where I belong, and that's where I'm going to stay. So don't be afraid to leave a position, okay? Especially if you're struggling there and you don't feel like you belong there. Okay? So part of feeling like you belong is also on you, though. It's not just outside sources. So one of the first things that I learned from a very good friend of mine who also happened to be my mentor in my first district was his whole idea was it doesn't matter what the kids are doing. It doesn't matter what else is going on in the building. Everything outside of my classroom doesn't matter right now. I'm going to do what I need to do to have a good day. So what he meant by that is, and he would openly say this to his kids too, is every day I come in here, I'm going to have a good day. And I'm going to do what I need to have a good day. This is part of how you can do discipline as well. You tell a student or your group of students at the beginning of the year when you're starting to lay down your rules and procedures that you're going to have a good day and you're going to do what you need to in order to have that. That means that in his case, if a student was doing things or not behaving in a way that was going to allow him to have a good day, he was going to, find a way to adjust that student's behaviors so that he would have a good day. Okay? And, that didn't necessarily mean that the student was going to have a good day, but it meant that he was. And that's part of taking care of yourself. You can't teach to your potential if you're overstressed, overworked, and you're unhappy, right? You need to take care of yourself first in order to take care of your students. So that's where you develop your classroom routines and discipline. Okay, that is a huge deal. If you want to impress your administrators, you need to be good at routines and your discipline. And if you're good at routines, discipline will be second nature to you. You won't have to be a disciplinarian, right? I can't remember the last time I wrote a referral or even had to correct a student outside of saying, hey, you forgot your safety glasses, right? That's basically the extent of discipline in my room as I've learned to manage my classroom. Once you've got the experience, discipline is just subconscious, okay? You really don't have to discipline your students if you're doing things right. Now, as far as going around your offices and your community and the politics involved, right? Interoffice politics are crazy, and they're different in every school district and every building. So, and this is what intimidates a lot of teachers, and it's a very tough thing to talk about in college with your professors because everyone's different. Every school's different. Every community's different. What you need to learn is how to adapt to those politics, okay? Most people tell you, oh, just stay out of the politics. That's not a realistic thing to say. It really isn't. You're going to get dragged into them some way or another. Whether you're directly involved or involved in the second hand, you're going to somehow at some point in your career end up involved in your building or community's politics. So the best way to go about approaching that is to expect that it's going to happen and figure out how to adjust. Make some connections, but maybe don't offer up super strong opinions unless you're asked to. Okay? Don't get overly involved with things that are outside of your control. That's a big one. A lot of teachers, they focus on things that are outside of their control. Don't do that. It's going to hurt your own mental health, and it's going to make enemies for you. So, when it comes to politics, find a way to navigate it without being deeply involved in the politics of your district, right? Part of that is community awareness and how you handle press of your program. Okay, it is great to get yourself out there and get known by the community, make friends, okay, get coverage, highlight the things that your kids are doing. At the same time, don't overdo it. Okay, if you overdo it, now you're getting back into that political arena where someone's not going to like what you're doing, even if you think it's awesome. So you need to find that balance, right? And that's what everything comes down to as a teacher, is finding balance. So I've included some additional reading here, right? I want to thank you all for seeing this presentation. This is my first time as a presenter for the fall conference. So please feel free to ask any questions. My contact information is at the end. I have some additional reading with some links here. Some of them are to articles, some of them are to videos. So there's an article, a short article on the Dunning-Kruger effect. There's some reading from the Buckminster Fuller Institute on Synergetics and Tensegrity. Okay, there is a very quick link to a clip with Don Norman explaining the basics of emotional design theory. And there's also, I threw in as a little bonus extra, a clip that I use, which I think kind of showcases more of that Eastern philosophy that I've personally adapted. And it's actually a clip that I use in some of my wood processing courses for my students who are getting introduced to wood processing, which is just a really great, relaxing video that shows you a whole other side to learning about material processing, woodworking, and these sorts of things. So that's where I cut this video off, because from there it's just a little outro. The resources to those videos mentioned in the end I will put in the description below, so if you are interested, please check them out. They're really cool, and some of them are just really relaxing to watch. So thanks again for stopping in, and I will talk to you all soon.